So what is going on, everyone? Fernando Silva here with another video, and the M1 iPad Pro was released back in May 21st of this year. So that gives us roughly 3 months with this device, and I've been using this M1 iPad Pro as my daily computer, my daily driver, and I wanted to give you guys my long-term review on this M1 iPad Pro. I wanted to share my honest experiences with this M1 iPad Pro because, again, I've been trying to make it my absolute computer, and there are use cases where it works and there are use cases where it doesn't, and that's what this video is going to be all about. True transparency from a daily iPad user that's been using their iPad daily since 2019, and now with this M1 iPad Pro for 3 months as my daily computer. So without further ado, we're going to find out if it can be a laptop replacement, if it's more of a supplemental device, and at the end of the day, if it's even worth it at the price point that it comes in, because it's expensive, guys. It starts at $1,100 and you can go up to $2,500 with these iPad Pros, which are tablets first, right? So let's find out and dive into this video. So I want to break this video down into a couple different parts, right? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what I use this M1 iPad Pro for. What does my daily usage look like when I use it as a main computer? The second thing I want to talk about is iPadOS 15, and then as well as some of the tangible differences and hardware differences with this M1 iPad Pro versus the rest of the lineup. And then finally, we're going to talk about battery life, because battery life has been a big proponent of this M1 iPad Pro when it comes to longevity, being able to use it anywhere, and then also when you add accessories, how that affects the battery, and also depending on what applications you're using, that also is going to affect your battery. So the first thing we're going to do is actually tell you exactly which M1 iPad Pro I have. We're rocking the base model, right? The base model 12.9. So 128 gigs of storage, 8 gigs of RAM, no data, again, 12.9 inch. So I do have that mini LED display on there, which is awesome, which is actually one of the best things about this iPad Pro when it comes to hardware. But that's the one that we're dealing with, so that's what I wanted to preface this entire video with. Now, the main thing that I use this iPad Pro for is YouTube, right? I know a lot of people don't like the idea of all these reviewers coming out and saying this iPad Pro can edit this video and it can render in this speed and it renders 18 million photographs in 10 seconds because that's how powerful it is. But that's not a big use case for a lot of people, right? So again, this is kind of like my LumaFusion, my YouTube editing machine. And the reason I went that way is because it was easy. LumaFusion is a very pro level application. I know people are like, the iPad Pro isn't pro until we get Final Cut Pro and Photoshop and this and that because they aren't pro level applications. But LumaFusion is very pro, right? Especially with the new update that came out, update 3.0, that was a free update if you already had it. And LumaFusion ranges from 20 to 40 bucks depending on when you get it. But that update, the two main things that update included for me personally is external storage support, finally, which is something that we've been wanting with the iPad Pro for so long, especially when we're only dealing with 128 gigs. And then secondly is that stabilizer inside of LumaFusion. So again, I'm very into the Apple ecosystem, so my workflow on the YouTube side is record on the iPhone, airdrop to the iPad Pro, edit everything on the iPad Pro, post it and upload it through YouTube on the iPad Pro, and then do all the administrative stuff like the descriptions and the tags and the monetization and all that. So all that is done on the iPad Pro. None of it is done on this MacBook Air over here. So that is my YouTube use case. And now you guys are probably gonna ask, Fernando, don't you have a 9-to-5 job? Don't you have a laptop that you use on a day-to-day basis as well? And the answer is yes, I do have a 9-to-5 job, and that 9-to-5 job is very heavy on the Google Suite and the Microsoft Suite. Two things which weren't optimized for the iPad Pro, right? So when using that iPad Pro as my main computer for work, it's a little bit different, right? There gets to a point where sometimes you're gonna be more efficient on a regular laptop, right? And those instances for me are, I do a lot of PowerPoint manipulation, so I'll have like 6, 7 PowerPoints open. I'll have a couple of Excel files because I'm manipulating data on the Excel files that then translate into like a chart or a data set inside of a PowerPoint presentation. So those are all things that require a lot of screen real estate. It requires multiple windows to be open, right? Shortcuts need to be working, like my control, copy, paste, all the cutting and things like that. So those are the situations where I have to go to the MacBook Air. Now, do I just stop using the iPad totally? No, I use the iPad as a supplemental device when doing those actual tasks and those line items, right? Because with the iPad Pro, can I manipulate PowerPoints? Absolutely, right? If I'm just working with 2 PowerPoints or 1 PowerPoint and 1 Excel sheet, the Microsoft Suite applications are actually amazing. If you're trying to get one thing done, maybe 2. But like I said, the moment you go into 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 30 windows open at the same time, where you're actually using all of those windows and the data that's on those windows, it's gonna be tough because you're gonna be moving from a lot of different spaces. You're gonna have like 3 different multitasking kind of sets inside of your iPad Pro, which can get a little bit confusing and inefficient, right? So that is the point where I gravitate away from the iPad Pro and then go to Mac OS and the iPad Pro. So I would kind of conjoin Mac OS and iPad OS. And then when it comes to the Google side of things, we take a lot of collaborative notes, a lot of things that need to be shared from one another. So in that use case, yes, the iPad can do anything that involves the Google Suite and Google Workspaces now that they're called. But again, the iPad Pro, can it do everything that I just mentioned? Yes, but you're gonna have some efficiency changes. So like you're not gonna be as efficient once you start multitasking a ton, right? You're gonna need, you need secondary monitor support when you're dealing with that many applications and that many windows. And those are all things that I'm not willing to sacrifice efficiency for the iPad Pro. So again, the iPad Pro is a beast in itself depending on what you want to get done. Can it be your only computer for YouTube? Hell yeah, yes it can. And I highly recommend, if you even have just an older iPad and an older iPhone, pick those two up and start a YouTube channel if that's what you want to do, and don't think that you need to get a new camera or the latest MacBook Pro with Final Cut Pro. All you need is an old iPad that can run LumaFusion or even iMovie, which is free, and then an iPhone to record and airdrop that on there. And then can your iPad Pro be like your main business machine to generate revenue and things like that? Of course. I manage all of my financials on the iPad Pro, on numbers, in Excel, I use all those applications, but again, I'm doing that with only one window open, and that's why I can still be efficient and productive, and that's why the iPad works for that situation. But the moment you start doing more than two things on the iPad Pro, for the most part, you're gonna be more efficient on a Mac OS computer, on a regular desktop, because it's just built differently. That's the way it's been built to be used. So when the iPad Pro does get that secondary monitor support and it isn't just mirroring and showing us letterboxing, then the iPad Pro will fully replace laptops, especially in my use case. But for now, if you are in the situation where you need all those windows open, then the iPad isn't going to do that, or it will be able to do that, but not as efficiently as a Mac computer. So that should encapsulate kind of the recap of what I use the iPad Pro and iPadOS for. And then in terms of hardware and software, the hardware is immaculate. I mean, this thing is so pristine, it's beautifully designed. You have the rails on the side, that new mini LED display with those, whatever the nit brightness is. I think it's like 1600 nit brightness. So even in the sunniest of conditions, you'll be able to watch, HDR content and watch it and the quality be really nice in terms of HDR quality, even outside. So the hardware is amazing, right? The only thing that's holding back this iPad Pro, it's not the hardware, because now with the M1 chips, 8 gigs of RAM, it should be able to handle everything that these M1 Macs can do, because this M1 Mac is also the baseline M1 MacBook Air, and it handles every single thing that I've thrown at it so far. So again, it just comes down to software. Yes, iPadOS 15 added some nice little upgrades. It made multitasking, even though from a function standpoint, multitasking remained the same, the way you access multitasking is a little bit more intuitive, right? You use your fingers to swipe down, you use all those gestures, slide over is a little bit easier to use, the quick note feature is awesome, and hopefully a foreshadow into what floating windows can look like inside of iPadOS 15. But again, iPadOS does definitely kind of hinder at least the multitasking professionalism that comes with desktop class operating systems, right? Those are meant to have a million windows open. Meanwhile, the iPad Pro, it's not. It just isn't meant to do that quite yet. Don't get me wrong, the iPad Pro, if you're a single workhorse machine, if you need one thing done, this is the most productive machine that you can have to get one task done. But if you need multiple things done, we gotta go to macOS. And then the very final thing that I wanted to bring up was battery life, because Apple is known for having great battery life on their tablets, especially now that they put in their own M1 chipsets. It should be even better, even though we were like the A14, A13, like the A series chips are pretty much the same architecture. But again, with the M1, we should be getting a little bit more battery life, right? But so far with the M1 iPad Pro, on a really good day, I'll get 8 to 10 hours of battery life with zero intensive tasks. So I'm talking Netflix, YouTube, browsing with Safari, going through social, all those things. That's not gonna drain your battery too much, but the moment you start using LumaFusion, the moment you start doing some more intensive tasks, like having multiple PowerPoints open at the same time, maybe watching videos, multitasking, then yeah, the battery is gonna drain very quickly, and I'm getting around 4.5 hours of screen on time on a full charge. So it all depends on how you play with it, what you're actually doing with it. And I know that gaming also sucks up a lot of power, because I play a lot of 2K, a lot of 2K21 from Apple Arcade. So from a battery life perspective, again, it's going to continue to get better, especially because I am on a beta program. So ideally, when the final release does come out, the battery life will reset and get better. But I did expect a little bit more out of the battery life. I was expecting 8 to 12 hours of battery life, especially after these MacBook Airs getting that much battery, if not more, right? And that's all because they just threw the M1 chip in there. Yes, I know the battery on these are way bigger than the batteries on the iPad Pro, but again, Apple should be able to give us that 10 hours that they said we could get. But those are my main categories when it comes to this iPad Pro. Do I recommend it? Hell yeah. If you're in the market for a tablet and you want the latest and greatest, the biggest and baddest, get an iPad Pro, or get any iPad for that matter. In my opinion, there's no competition when it comes to the tablet market. Yes, Samsung has some nice things with Samsung DeX and all that stuff, but you gotta be in their ecosystem. If you're in the Apple ecosystem and you're looking for a tablet, get an iPad. Don't wait for something new. Go to the refurbished section, get a 2018 iPad Pro for like $500 versus $1,100 over here. And that is just my advice when it comes to that. So my overall consensus with the iPad Pro is this, right? As a productivity machine, if you need to get 1 or 2 tasks done, there's really nothing better, especially if your application actually runs natively on iPadOS. There's literally nothing better. Like when I'm editing a LumaFusion video, that is the only thing that I'm doing, and I get it done super quickly because there's nothing distracting me from it. But then on the other hand, when you need to have multiple things open at once, you need real secondary monitor support, you're gonna need to go with a desktop class operating system like Windows, like Mac OS, because otherwise you're gonna have some efficiency losses with your iPad Pro. And if you're okay with that, then by all means, go for it. And then my relationship with the iPad Pro was, for especially even now, is the hardware is so amazing, the hardware is gorgeous, and I still see a super bright future with the actual operating system and iPadOS moving forward and things like that, that I'm willing to make those sacrifices to make the iPad Pro my main machine. I tweeted out the other day that if you like something enough, you'll learn how to use it. I don't need to use the iPad Pro, and I could probably do a lot of the same stuff on my MacBook Air and be okay, but I want to use the iPad Pro because of how it looks, how versatile it is, what I've been able to do with this iPad Pro. Like this channel would not exist without this iPad Pro, and again, I just love my iPad Pro, and I'm going to continue to try to use it as my main and only computer because I'm okay with that. Now a lot of people aren't, and they want more out of the iPad Pro, and so do I. I want that secondary monitor support. I want floating windows. I just want pro-level multitasking. That's what I need out of the iPad Pro. But until then, we're going to hold on to the iPad Pro. I'm still going to use it as my main machine, especially on the YouTube side, and then supplement it with my MacBook Air on the other side. Now, a lot of people are going to say that the iPad Pro should supplement your MacBook, but I kind of use it the other way around. I use the MacBook to supplement my iPad Pro. But that is my 2 cents. If you guys need an iPad Pro, just buy it. You're not going to really regret it. Don't think that immediately it's going to replace your laptop because there's going to be a learning curve. Make sure that your applications that you're running on your Windows or Mac computer will also run on your iPadOS device, because if not, then you can't actually migrate over to iPadOS. It just won't be feasible. But if you want something super powerful, sleek, versatile, that can do 99.9% of what operating systems or desktop class operating systems can do, then the iPad Pro is the way to go. But I wanted to give you guys my brutally honest review as a person who's been using an iPad Pro daily for over 2 years. And that's what I've seen. It's a great supplemental device either way. It just depends on what you're going to use it for and if you're okay with how you're getting from point A to point B to get that task done. But that's going to do it for this video. Leave your comments down below. What do you think about this video? Did you guys think I was just going to be all in on the iPad Pro and say go all in on the iPad Pro, or vice versa? But I kind of, like I said, I wanted to be honest with it in my entire experience, is that for the most part, the iPad Pro can do everything for me, but there are a couple instances where I need to go to Mac OS to get some work done. But that's going to do it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Leave a comment below if you had to pick one. Which one are you going with, right? Because these are both base level models. You know, this one is $1,400 with the Apple Pencil and the Magic Keyboard. This one was $900 from the Apple Education Store, just like that. So let me know what you guys would rather have if you had to pick one. And also don't forget to check out channel sponsor Paperlike and Tiny Rigs. They're doing some awesome stuff over there. First link's in the description down below. But until next time, peace.